In the first part of the Delapole Stories from the Strongrooms, we looked at the life of William Delapole and the foundations that he laid for his son, Michael, and the subsequent members of the Delapole family. In this second part of our Stories from the Strongrooms, we look at the life and legacy of Michael Delapole and his descendants before their eventual retreat into the pages of history. Michael Delapole was the eldest son of William Delapole and Catherine of Norwich. Through his marriage to Catherine Wingfield, he inherited lands in Norfolk. However, unlike his father, Michael did not follow a mercantile career. He followed a military career, fighting in the 100 Years' War alongside Edward the Black Prince and John of Gaunt. Politically, he surpassed his father, rising to the position of Chancellor under Richard II. However, like his father before him, he also fell afoul to the crown, of which Michael never recovered from, eventually dying in exile in Paris in 1389. At the height of his power, Michael never forgot his roots in Hull and was responsible for founding the Carthusian Priory, which once stood on the site of today's Charterhouse. This is the story of Michael Delapole, 1st Earl of Suffolk. Michael Delapole was born around 1330, and quite possibly in Hull. By 1350, he had set out to forge a military career. At the time of his father's death in 1366, Michael was already a prominent soldier in the English army, which led to him being knighted. Michael's marriage in 1358 brought him several estates in East Anglia, and in 1385 the title of 1st Earl of Suffolk was bestowed on him. Michael had 8 children. The eldest, Michael, would also follow in his father's footsteps, fighting in the 100 Years' War with France, and like his father, he too would become Earl of Suffolk. Michael Delapole's military career brought him to the notice of Henry, Duke of Lancaster and John of Gaunt, whom he fought with in the 100 Years' War. He was present at the Siege of Limoges with Edward the Black Prince and remained in Gascony with John of Gaunt. Probably as a reward for his service with John of Gaunt, Michael was appointed Admiral north of the Thames, a senior naval appointment responsible for the command of the naval fleet that operated in the North Sea. His military career was not without incident. He was twice captured and most likely ransomed. This did little to hinder his rise to prominence, and it was under Richard II, probably as a result of his connections with John of Gaunt, who was uncle to Richard, that brought Michael close to the king. It was under Richard II that Michael took the role as ambassador to negotiate the marriage of Richard in 1379, and it was upon Michael's return that his career really began to take off. He, along with the Earl of Arundel, became advisor to Richard in 1381, and in 1383 he was appointed Chancellor, one of the oldest and most important positions in the kingdom. Michael continued to serve in a military capacity, but by the standards of the day he was in the later years of his life. In 1385 he went on expedition to Scotland, and in the same year he was given the title 1st Earl of Suffolk. Things were therefore going rather well for Michael. Not only had he had the ear of the king, he had ascended to the rank of Earl, the first Delapole to do so, while politically he surpassed his father by becoming Chancellor. However, the good times were not to last for Michael. Medieval politics was a dangerous game. Michael was probably feeling somewhat confident, having found royal favour under Richard. However, his peace policy with France, approved by Richard, signalled the beginning of the end for Michael Delapole. Many felt the terms of peace which Michael had negotiated deprived England of better terms. Added to this, a deep financial crisis created additional unrest and resentment, of which much was aimed towards Michael from the wider political circle. Parliament now moved against him. They demanded Michael's dismissal and impeachment. The king refused at first. However, increasing pressure eventually brought about Michael Delapole's removal from office, with charges of impeachment brought against him. The impeachment charges were connected to his failings as Chancellor. Firstly, he was accused of failing to provide relief for the garrison at Ghent. Michael argued this was not solely his responsibility alone. The charges also included the purchase of lands for less than their value, and although true, Michael argued his gains were minimal. Despite this, Michael was found guilty of misusing his position as Chancellor. All lands he received by royal grant were forfeited. He was fined 20,000 marks and spent a short time in prison. He did, however, retain the title of Earl of Suffolk. After a short time in prison, he joined the king at Windsor, who had now had the fine remitted. Michael, although back in the king's favour, remained vulnerable as tensions grew between the king and his opponents. An appeal of treason was published in which Michael was accused of using influence over the king to further his own ambitions. It was reputed that Michael's strong personality had overwhelmed the king. As pressure mounted against him, Michael fled overseas. His first stop was Calais, where his brother, Edmund de la Pole, was captain of the castle. To avoid detection, Michael was said to have shaved his head and beard. His brother, however, spotted him and refused to admit him. Michael, now detained, was returned to London. The king did allow Michael to return to Hull. A royal sergeant, however, was sent to arrest him, but it was too late. Michael had already left the Hull for Netherlands, and from there Michael went to Paris. In his absence, Michael de la Pole was convicted of treason and sentenced to death. He was stripped of his lands and the earldom of Suffolk. Michael's exile in Paris did not last long. He died in Paris on the 5th of September 1389, probably in relative poverty, a far cry from the life he once knew. This was a sad end to what was a rise of political importance for the de la Pole family. But 14th century politics proved a dangerous game, something Michael bore witness to at first hand. Perhaps it was Michael's origins that stuck in the throat of his contemporaries. As a son of a merchant, he had risen to one of the highest offices in the land. This, with his close relationship with the king, was perhaps seen as a step too far by some. Michael de la Pole never forgot his connection with Hull. He retained Suffolk Palace on the corner of Lawgate, the mansion house acquired by his father when he became mayor of Hull in 1331. Michael established the Carthusian Priory in 1377, replacing his father's earlier founding. In his final adjustment, he separated the hospital from the Carthusian Priory, in which 13 poor people of each sex were to live in or near the hospital. It is the Carthusian Priory that Michael's mother and wife were interred. Michael's body was eventually returned from Paris and interred along with his mother and wife in 1390. The de la Pole family, not finished politically, never really regained the same political influence that Michael had achieved. Michael's son, also Michael, successfully petitioned Henry IV, probably helped by his support when Henry landed at Spain, to have his father's judgment reversed. The Suffolk title was restored along with some of the estates, but not all his father's previous holdings were forthcoming. The restoration of his father's estates would elude Michael the Younger until his death in 1415 at the Siege of Harfleur. William de la Pole, the first de la Pole to acquire the title Duke of Suffolk and grandson of Michael de la Pole, first Earl of Suffolk, met a grisly end. A favourite of the weak Henry VI and associated with many failures of royal policy, particularly with losses of English territories in France, William was sent into exile. However, on his journey to Calais, his ship was intercepted. William was captured and subjected to a mock trial on board before being beheaded. His body was later found near Dover and brought to Hull to be interred in the Carthusian Priory, along with his grandfather. John de la Pole, the great-great-grandson of Michael de la Pole, first Earl of Suffolk, was informally recognised by his uncle, Richard III, as heir to the throne through his father, who had married Elizabeth Plantagenet, the sister of King Edward IV. John, however, was killed at the Battle of Stoke Field in 1387, fighting for the Yorkist army in rebellion against Henry VII, who had defeated Richard III 4 years previous. The de la Pole family continued to be a threat. John's brother, Edmund de la Pole, 3rd Duke of Suffolk, became a claimant to the English throne through his Yorkist bloodline, but was executed on orders of Henry VIII. John de la Pole's son, William, was held prisoner at the Tower of London for 37 years, until his death in 1539, the longest stay of any prisoner in the Tower's history. Had Richard III won at Bosworth in 1483, history perhaps would be different today. Although it was largely away from Hull that the future of Michael de la Pole and his ancestors lay, they still retained land in the town, and with it derived an income and continued to have influence on town affairs. The town looked upon the Delapoles favourably and provided the family with gifts. Spiritually, Hull remained important to the Delapoles, with several members of the family buried within the Carthusian Priory, founded by Michael Delapole in 1377. The link between Hull and Suffolk was commemorated in 1931 by both Hull Corporation, now Hull City Council, and Wingfield, with a plinth standing in the parish church at Wingfield. We hope you enjoyed this second part of this two-part talk on the Delapoles. Don't forget to look out for more stories from the Strongrooms in the near future and hit the subscribe button. For more information about the Hull History Centre and the services we offer, visit www.hullhistorycentre.org.uk.